afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation. My name is Ashley Ross. I'm a clinical research assistant for the All of Us research program at Rush University Medical Center, and I will be moderating today's presentation, so it's very nice to virtually meet with you all today. I'm here with Sophie Sepura, who is also a clinical research assistant for the All of Us research program at Rush, and joining us is also Dr. Lisa Sanchez-Johnson, and she is an associate professor for the Department of Family Medicine at Rush, and also co-investigator for the All of Us research program at Rush University Medical Center. So they will be the ones that are conducting today's presentation, and we are really great and lucky to have them here to speak with us about the topic of dementia. And thank you so much to the Oak Park Library and Rose for having us today. I just love to welcome Sophie, who will be speaking about Alzheimer's today, and as well as Dr. Lisa Sanchez-Johnson.
Great. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Ashley, for that introduction. As she mentioned, my name is Sophie. We're thrilled to be here with you all today and for this chance to open up the discussion on Alzheimer's disease. So thank you all for joining us. And with that, we can go to the next slide, please. And before we begin, I wanted to quickly touch on some of the things we'll be going over. So we can go to the next slide as well. Thank you. So some of the things we'll be going over today are including recognizing the differences between Alzheimer's disease and dementia, and the different stages and risk factors seen for this disease. And we will briefly be going over some of the common treatments, as well as some of the research studies being done. And for those interested, we have some resources available, after which we will then open the floor for any questions and answers. Next slide, please. So after this presentation, our hope is to be able to explain the umbrella of dementia a little bit more, and help our audience understand how to look for the 10 signs of the disease. And at the end of this, we do encourage our audience to ask questions and share and connect through your experiences with Alzheimer's. Next slide, please. Thank you. So before we begin, I wanted to introduce you to the scientist behind the discovery of Alzheimer's disease, Alois Alzheimer. He was a German neurologist interested in diseases of the brain. And in 1901, he met a 51-year-old woman who suffered from short-term memory loss, which worsened into severe dementia. And it was in 1906, after this woman's passing, that during an autopsy of her brain, Alzheimer first described seeing plaques and string-like tangles in those usually empty spaces between her brain nerve cells. And it was later when he delivered a lecture about these findings that brought him to fame, because those plaques and the tangles that he described became what we now know as Alzheimer's disease. Next slide, thank you. So since the discovery of this disease, there are now currently more than 5 million Americans living with Alzheimer's. So considering this number, Alzheimer's therefore also impacts more than 15 million family members, friends, and caregivers. Next slide, please. Now, dementia is a term that's often intermixed with Alzheimer's. However, Alzheimer's and dementia are not the same. Dementia is actually a more umbrella term for the different types of dementias, whereas Alzheimer's, as seen here, is actually the most common form of dementia, accounting for 60 to 80% of dementia cases. Next slide, please. Thank you. So looking more closely at the differences, dementia is a more general umbrella term, as I mentioned, describing a group of symptoms associated with a decline in a person's cognitive abilities to the point that it interferes with their daily life. Alzheimer's, meanwhile, is a specific type of dementia, a degenerative brain disease that where the dementia symptoms gradually worsen to the point that even simplest tasks can become impossible. And next slide, please. Thank you. So though there's currently no cure for Alzheimer's, Researchers have identified the biological cause of the disease, which we now know is cell damage from abnormal deposits of protein called amyloid plaques and twisted fibers called tau tangles. And those together build up throughout the brain and in spaces between the brain's nerve cells. And throughout the brain, we have these billions of nerve cells called neurons that send messages in order to make memories and feelings and thoughts. So when those proteins and fiber deposits build up the way they do with this disease, those ones help the neurons lose connection, and they lose connection with other neurons and they can die. So as more neurons die and as more neural connection break down, that brain tissue begins to shrink. So by the final stages of Alzheimer's, this process of brain atrophy, which is, as you can see in the photo, becomes widespread, causing significant loss of brain volume and ultimately severe loss of basic functions. Next slide, please. And Alzheimer's usually progresses in very slowly in three general stages: early, middle, and late. So as the disease progresses, each person is affected differently. So while it's not always exactly the same for everybody, the following here are just to give you a general idea of the changes at each stage. So in the early stages, for instance, the person diagnosed may function independently, they may still drive, work, be part of social activities. And despite this, some minor difficulties may be noticed, such as forgetting familiar words or something the person might have just read. The middle stage can often last for many years, however, because the neural damage spreads to the frontal lobes, which are involved in problem solving and judgment and impulse control. And this part of the brain is also what usually helps prevent us from saying or doing things that might be viewed as otherwise inappropriate or even bizarre. So given this, symptoms can be more noticeable, where the person diagnosed might begin displaying unusual behaviors, such as insisting on wearing the same certain clothes at all times or wearing that pair of socks in the bathtub, things like that. And in the late stage of Alzheimer's, in this final stage, the dementia symptoms are often so severe that the person usually needs constant care and supervision. The person may lose awareness of their surroundings, and as their cognitive skills worsen, they may no longer be able to recognize familiar faces. Significant personality changes may take place. They may become increasingly violent or paranoid, or they could begin wandering during a state of confusion called sundowning. And the physical abilities can deteriorate to the point that basic daily living skills such as speaking, swallowing, bowel and bladder control, that can become different and difficult. So at this stage, you can imagine how something like compassionate care is actually even more important. So we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So with how tricky it can be to distinguish Alzheimer's from normal age-related changes, being able to identify something like this early on is so important in allowing for preparation of or potentially preventative action to be taken that much sooner. So to help with that diagnosis, or to help with that early diagnosis, the Alzheimer's Association created a list of 10 warning signs to help people be able to identify symptoms that might be related to Alzheimer's. So for number one, with memory loss, although symptoms can vary widely, difficulty remembering things or forgetfulness is often the most common early stage symptom of Alzheimer's. And while normally aging people may also forget things, they will typically remember them later. So in other words, you typically remember what you forgot, but with Alzheimer's, that doesn't necessarily happen. You can forget something, or you can forget recently learned information, and even after someone reminds you, it doesn't seem familiar. So one of the common telltale signs of Alzheimer's, for instance, is discovering that your loved one left the stove on for hours which is actually a memory loss. I'm sorry, a memory lapse that can put others in danger, and that's not a normal age-related change. So for number two, with confusion with time or with place, a normally aging person might get confused with the day of the week, but they can usually remember where they are later. A person with Alzheimer's, however, may not only lose track of dates or lose track of where they are, but they can lose track of how they got there or their perception of time. So 5 minutes can seem like 5 hours or weeks for that person. And this is actually one that still stands out to me because my grandfather actually had Alzheimer's. And during a visit when I was 16, he pulled my mom aside and asked her who that woman was in his kitchen. And she explained to him, "That's Sophie, your granddaughter." And he responded with a lot of confusion, saying, "No, Sophie is only 5 years old. That's a full grown woman." So for him, there was very much a loss of perception of time. And with number three, difficulty completing familiar tasks, this might be this might be seen when you're driving to that familiar grocery store that you've gone to for years, and suddenly being unsure of how to get there or how to get home. And for number four, feelings of confusion might be experienced as well as suspicion or anxiety as a result of that confusion. And with number five, we might see more decisions be made that can be irresponsible, as I mentioned earlier, or even inappropriate or even unsafe. And then number six, someone with Alzheimer's might find it so much harder to develop and follow a plan or work with numbers. So for instance, the person might find that they're now unable to follow the ingredients to that same favorite chocolate chip banana bun recipe that they'd had in their family for 30 years. And that suddenly might start to become very difficult. And for number seven, with new problems with words and speaking or writing, the person diagnosed might have trouble following or joining a conversation. They might stop in the middle of a conversation and have no idea how to continue, or they might repeat themselves. And with number eight, since it might feel harder for that person to engage in conversation, the person also might become more socially withdrawn as a result. And for number nine, when it comes to misplacing things or losing the ability to retrace your steps, for this one, for many of us, myself included, we've all lost our keys, our purses, our glasses. But losing your glasses, for instance, and not even perhaps remembering that you need glasses, that can be a sign. So sometimes those with Alzheimer's might misplace something and then not be able to find it later because they don't identify that object, such as their glasses, as their own. So they might lose things and be unable to retrace their steps in that sense. And for number 10, with trouble understanding visual images, facial relationships, this can be seen when the person diagnosed suddenly has trouble judging distances, such as determining the height of a stair or how close they are to a chair when they're trying to sit down. And we can actually go to the next slide, please. So though the greatest known risk factor for Alzheimer's is increasing age, it has been found that people younger than 65 can develop what's also called as early onset Alzheimer's. But it's after age 65 that risk typically doubles every 5 years. And with family history, as you might imagine, those with family members who have Alzheimer's are more likely to develop what's called familial Alzheimer's disease. However, you have to remember that your likelihood of developing the disease is not always genetic because environmental factors and your lifestyle can play a role as well, such as your diet, how much you exercise, how often you engage in mentally stimulating activities. So we can't change the genes that we inherit from our parents, but we can change our lifestyle in ways that can prevent diseases that might run in the family. And with regards to race and ethnicity, the disease has been found to be more common in certain groups. So, for instance, research has shown that older African Americans develop it at a rate of, being twice as likely to develop it, and Hispanic is being about 1.5 times more likely. And the reason for this still is not completely understood, but it is believed that those higher risks may be due to the higher rates of vascular diseases that are often seen in those groups. And with gender, recent research has found that women typically are more at risk than men. And at first, you might think that this is because women typically live longer than men, making them therefore more likely to reach the ages of greater risk. However, there has been emerging evidence that suggests that this may be due to unique biological reasons, due to a certain gene variant that some women may carry. And so perfect, thank you for changing the slide. So when it comes to all those risk factors that I mentioned, as you can see, there are quite a few. But while this might seem very overwhelming to consider, being aware of these risks really is so key in helping to take those preventative measures that much sooner. Because there are things within our control, as I mentioned, like your lifestyle habits, your sleep, your diet, that can all lessen the risk that much more. We can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Now, when we look at the diagnostic processes behind Alzheimer's disease, physicians may look at things like your medical history, your mental health status, your physical and neurological exam and your exam results, diagnostic test, and brain imaging. And as you can imagine, an accurate diagnosis of Alzheimer's is a very important first step in ensuring that you then have appropriate treatment and care and family education, and ultimately be able to take the steps to make future plans down the road. We can go to the next slide, please. So here, why don't we open this up to the audience just for a moment, just to share how some of you have been keeping your brains healthy. And this might be through regular exercise or diets, like I mentioned. So I would love to hear from those of you in the audience, what might be something that you guys have been doing. Since a healthy brain is a healthy heart is a healthy brain. Oh, great. So we do have some people writing. Spin class, that's a great one. Yoga, especially. I'll give a chance for others to write. Yoga again, and novels. Absolutely, reading is such a mental stimulation. Biking, getting outside really does make a difference. Learning new skills, that's great. Crossword puzzles, I am definitely a crossword puzzle person, so I can absolutely agree. These are great. And you'll notice that every single one of these examples, exercising, yes, every single one of these examples is so oriented around not just not just oriented around mentally stimulating activities, but your overall well-being, because a healthy heart really does contribute to a healthy brain, if you will. All right, so we can go ahead to the next slide then. Walking with a group is another one, absolutely. And I think then, and please feel free to continue adding to this chat, if you will, and we can talk more about this during the Q&A. Okay, great. Thank you all so much for contributing to this. Meditation and connecting with friends. Yes, being social really does do wonders. All right. And while I wait for some people to contribute more to the chat, I will just look back at this slide with regard to the common treatment for Alzheimer's. And while there still is not a perfect way to stop or slow the progression of the disease, these are just some of the drug and non-drug options that are currently known that may help stop the symptoms of the disease. And similarly to what I was saying before, understanding these available options can really help those living with the disease and their caregivers in terms of making those plans down the road and coming up with the preventative measures that might be taken to not only cope with symptoms, but to also potentially improve quality of life. And we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Now, with regards to the resources, I did mention earlier on that we would be sharing some resources. This is something that I will also be providing after this presentation for those of you who might be interested. But we really wanted to be able to share this in case it's useful to some of you. For those of you who might be diagnosed with Alzheimer's or have family members that have been diagnosed, or those of you who are family members or especially caregivers. And caregivers don't apply just to those who are medical professionals and nursing assistants. It doesn't apply to those who are in the medical professional field. Caregivers really apply to those who are, or also applies to those who are family members, friends, neighbors, because every single one of you really does have a role in this journey. And so with that being said, it does perhaps equally affect those of you who've been diagnosed. It does equally affect those of you caregivers. So just looking down at some of the resources that have been provided here, we have a couple that have been provided from the Alzheimer's Association, such as the Community Resource Finder, the Alzheimer's Navigator, and then there's a lot of caregiving support group that I definitely encourage some of you in the audience to check out. And you can check all those out through each of these. And then we also do have a couple of online workshops provided by the Alzheimer's Association, which are free. So I absolutely encourage you to check those out as well. And as I mentioned, there's some free online community support groups where it's not just those who've been affected, but those who are diagnosed as well. Those who might have spouses that have been diagnosed. And when you consider how overwhelming this sort of diagnosis can be, this can be really, really helpful to find a group of people to help you get that guidance or help you navigate your way through it. And with that being said, we also have something called the Dementia Friends Initiative, which we have located as well at the Rush University Medical Center. And this is just an initiative that aims to help people put themselves into the shoes of those diagnosed and help to better their understanding of dementia and Alzheimer's specifically. And we can go ahead then to the next slide. Thank you. So I wanted to also go over the research behind Alzheimer's and dementia. And the National Institute of Health, for instance, or the NIH, has helped to find several distinguished organizations that are oriented around Alzheimer's awareness and research, including those here in Chicago. So that includes the very well-known Alzheimer's Association, as well as the Rush Alzheimer's Disease Center, which is located at Rush University Medical Center. And this medical center, or this Alzheimer's Disease Center, is actually one of the 29 Alzheimer's centers in the country that designated and funded by the National Institute on Aging. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. Now, given how devastating Alzheimer's disease is, impacting with how much it impacts the millions of families and ultimately our nation's economy, increasing research funding is so key. So as you can see here, the federal government has risen to this challenge over the years. And in 2019, for instance, our work was able to secure over $100 million in state funding for dementia-specific care and support services and research, public health activities, home and community-based services. And all of those have been supported so that they can meet the needs of individuals and families living with dementia and Alzheimer's. And on that note, actually, I would like to hand this back over to Dr. Sanchez Johnson, who will be sharing a little bit more about the research studies that we've been doing at Rush University Medical Center, which are so key in helping to accelerate medical breakthroughs for diseases such as Alzheimer's. All right.
Great. Thank you so much, Sophie. That was really, really interesting. I'm sure, our audience is learning so much as you're able to share your knowledge with us and, heavily researched and documented. So thank you again for that. So some of you may wonder, as we can see in the next slide, what you could do, how you can help. So each person really can make a huge difference by in accelerating medical research, which we know is critically important, especially for this condition, a health condition, in accelerating medical breakthroughs, particularly with older adult health, but participating in many different studies out there. So I'd like to just go over a few of them that are conducted at Rush itself. If we can see the next slide, about participation in what we call RADC, the Rush Alzheimer's Disease Center. So at Rush, there are many studies ongoing across different age groups, especially at the RADC. And as Sophie had mentioned, the RADC is one of 29 Alzheimer's centers in the United States funded by the National Institute of Health. And it offers patient care, not just research, but patient care through the Rush Memory Clinic, including neurological and psychological evaluations and consultation with various Alzheimer's specialists. And so this slide is just kind of showing you here where you might be able to call if you're interested in learning more about these research studies. There's no cost to participate. For various studies, interviews may be conducted over the phone, and you may be able to ask to provide basic information, and you could be considered for current or future research at the RADC. And of course, all studies are approved by the Rush Institutional Review Board. And in particular on this slide, the RADC is looking for adults over 18 years old to participate in Rush Memory Clinic data and the specimen repository as seen here. And the goal of the repository is to learn more about age-related conditions such as Alzheimer's disease and the aging process. It will help researchers, as it can be seen here, answer important questions such as why people may have a difficulty with thinking or walking, strength, and the ability to perform daily activities as they age. So again, you can take a look at this and call it. I believe we also have the website on another slide as well. And so, yeah, great. Thank you for turning us to the next slide. So here also are some examples of the work that we also do at the RADC, such as work for the NIH-funded research program, the All of Us research program, with which Ashley and Sophie and I are a part of, and I'll talk about that in a second. But also there's a study called Preventable, and Preventable is one of the largest studies actually conducted in older adults, and the purpose is to learn if taking statin, which is a drug commonly used to treat to lower cholesterol, could help older adults live well for longer periods by preventing dementia, disability, or heart disease. And specifically for the All of Us research program, well, we know in the broadest sense, the reason why we're talking about Alzheimer's disease is because Alzheimer's diagnoses are expected to triple by the year 2060, yet some groups are more at risk than others or more affected than others. As Sophie had mentioned, if this current trend persists, about 14% of Blacks or African Americans and 12% of Hispanics over the age 65 will be diagnosed with this disease, compared to 10% of non-Hispanic white older adults, according to the CDC. And despite the rapidly growing number of racial and ethnic minorities who will be diagnosed with this disease, the medical community knows relatively little about how to treat them because these certain ethnic groups are vastly underrepresented in clinical trials. So that's why we're doing this research program in conjunction with a number of universities, not just in Chicago, but also across the nation. Also today, most dementia-related clinical trials, again, are white, even though African Americans and Hispanics are more likely to develop Alzheimer's disease. So with the All of Us research program, it's one that aims to not only give representation to those of underrepresented communities, but it's entirely oriented around getting people of all backgrounds to join this study, because the more people, the better chances we have at learning more through research. And also the All of Us research program is a national as I said, many different sites across the United States, I guess, a database that will aim to store health data from 1 million or more diverse participants and gives researchers a chance to study thousands of different health conditions, including Alzheimer's or dementia. So do consider joining the All of Us research program to help advance health research for conditions like Alzheimer's. So also on the next page, on the next slide, we do have our contact information at the Rush Alzheimer's Disease Center for just some overall information about various research studies. And then specifically for the All of Us research program, that's the website there, and it can help to navigate you and tell a little bit more about the study. There's also the preventable study that I had mentioned. And Sophia earlier had talked about the Dementia Friends USA, and we have here listed the website. Also on the other side of the slide, we have our contact information. And we do want to acknowledge several individuals who have been critical in the Alzheimer's disease field, and also with the All of Us research program. Rush is the also, Dr. Raj Shah, pardon me, is at the Rush Alzheimer's Disease Center. He's the PI or principal investigator for the Rush site for the All of Us research program, does many other clinical trials and research with Alzheimer's disease. David Sedilio is our program manager for the All of Us research program. And Susan Frick is a social worker at the Rush Alzheimer's Disease Center. So we do want to thank them as very much a part of the work that we do here at Rush. And in the next slide is just kind of illustrating, I believe, the references section. If Ashley could go to the next slide, we can show our viewers. Well, we do have some references, but at this point, I guess I'm going to just pause and just have a little bit of a space for some Q&A. I'm seeing that some questions are coming through, but we'd like to just hear from you. What would you like to know more about? Was anything surprising to you that you learned today? And also, what did you find most interesting? So I can open it up actually. At this point, we don't have anything other than this that's planned to share with you, other than just kind of having a conversation with our viewers and maybe even each other as colleagues here at Rush. And so we had a question that came in. Someone had asked, I'm assuming it is for people already diagnosed with Alzheimer's. I'm thinking that that person might be referring to the research studies, perhaps. And so with the All of Us research program, that is really wide open to anybody to join. We're looking for adults in that population. So please do feel free to kind of go to the All of Us research program website there. It's definitely not just for people diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. So yeah, feel free to join and just find out about it. Sometimes people go to the website just to, even if they're not interested, they might know somebody else that is interested. And at Rush and just among my colleagues here, Ashley and Sophie, we're big advocates for just sharing information. Again, it may or may not apply to you, but just it may apply to other people that are in your lives. So Sophie is saying also in our chat box, did you want to follow up with what you had mentioned in your the chat there?
Sure, I was just about to. Can you all hear me still, by the way? Just double checking. These are great questions already, by the way. So thank you all for asking these, because this is exactly why we wanted to do this. There's any and all questions are welcome. So there is one question that's also come in, and the question is that with regard to whether or not this is something that can't be diagnosed until after the person's passed. And there are so many, as I was briefly mentioning earlier, there are ways that we are able to diagnose this while the person is still very much with us, because there are those symptoms that are, I mean, there's some symptoms that can be so similar to the normal age-related memory loss that I mentioned, but then there's other symptoms such as erratic behavior, the phenomenon I mentioned called sundowning, those sorts of behaviors which require a professional to much more carefully look at them. And when those symptoms and when those behaviors are falling within that category that we now know are the behaviors for Alzheimer's, then a pretty good diagnosis can be made. You can also look at your family's history, but the good news is that we do have the resources and the technology, the medical technology nowadays, to be able to more closely look at our brain activity and at our behavioral patterns, as well as through those medical examinations. So it can very much be diagnosed during life. And even though we don't have a perfect cure yet, we don't have a way to perfectly slow down the degeneration that's in Alzheimer's of the brain. As I was saying earlier, being able to identify it that much sooner helps us to at least prepare that much sooner. We have another question. Can you speak more about the treatments that are available now and what they target? That's a great question. And I don't know if I'm speaking too much. So at least Dr. Sanchez-Johnson, would you also like to try to pass the mic a little bit?
Sure, exactly. And I should caveat this again by saying I am a clinical psychologist, so I'm not an MD in terms of giving that sort of information. But again, part of why we're sharing this is just to, as a first step of disseminating the information so that you are fully aware of where to also follow up for some additional, more detailed answers, because we're learning with everybody else in terms of this vast field. So on this slide that Sophie had put up are just more the medical treatments in terms of those targets for Alzheimer's. So maybe we can just keep this up for a few minutes because we didn't go over it too much in details, but various different medications that are available. And then also we have a question that says, what is Lewy disease? I don't know if Ashley or Sophie, being from RADC, specifically, if you have experience with that in terms of patients having that possibly
That's a great
diagnosis.
question. I can very quickly jump in. So, and the long answer short is that this is just another one of those types of dementia that falls under that realm of the umbrella of dementia. Alzheimer's, which is one of them, but what's called Lewy body dementia, is one of those other dementias, and it's very similar in its symptoms to those that I mentioned earlier for Alzheimer. It's the second most degenerative disease and the second most progressive disease, unfortunately, but they're very similar in their degenerative rates.
And I can also just speak to Lewy body dementia a little bit. My father is actually diagnosed with Lewy body's dementia, and I'm his full-time caregiver for everyday life with him. So it's been a definitely something, a personal account. So of course I'm not a clinician. I don't have any clinical say in any of this, but I just from what my his physician has told us and just experiencing, with him and how he carries out life, and it just seems like what the main differences are in the kind of like the symptoms, like so he was saying, and there's more prevalence of, it's more of a vascular dementia, what we were told. So it's more having to do with, he does have a lot more sundowning. That's something that Sophie was also talking about, just in terms of, when they are experiencing different things at night and more paranoia, things like that. So there's more prevalence in certain symptoms as opposed to other types of dementia or Alzheimer's disease as a whole. So I thought I'd just give a little bit of information. Like I said, I'm not a clinician, but I just have my father as kind of somebody I can have a personal account for. So I don't know if that helps at all.
Oh, for sure. I love the sharing that you're doing on a personal level and just kind of sharing the health information as well. It's very, very important to just hear from people in ways that this illness and condition also affects you also, personally, not just your loved one. So yeah, that's a great response. And also I'm seeing some people kind of jumping in. I want to just acknowledge that you're sort of touching base on another comment that we had about some of the symptoms for vascular dementia, which you're educating us about Lewy body disease also being kind of having some features of that. The question also was that are there treatments for other types of dementia that are not Alzheimer's? So, again, because of what you just mentioned, it may be that the path kind of looks different and will pull on different symptoms, as you said. I'm not aware of how the treatment might differ for Alzheimer's versus these other forms of dementia, but that is on my mind right now to look up. Does anybody have anything else that they wanted to share specifically about that? And we were seeing that Robin Williams had a Lewy body's dementia, right?
Thank you so much, Dr. Sandra Johnson. That's a great question. That's one that we do get asked quite a bit, or that we have been asked quite a bit in the past when discussing all of this. I think it's with regard to vascular dementia, first of all, I think the key difference with that is that it's a result of injury to the brain where there's a shortage of supply, like when your blood supply to the brain has been affected. And that is what vascular dementia would be versus the other types of dementia, such as Alzheimer, where it's a result of the built up plaques and tau tangles I mentioned between your brain's nerve cells. So it's one of the many different types of dementias. Robin Williams did sadly have Lewy body dementia as well. I'm just acknowledging what's been written. But with regards to the types of treatments, this is something that we are still, that's currently still very much in progress. That's exactly why we have these experimental trials, why we are doing these studies, because there are multiple different types of not treatment, but experimental trials that are being done to see what approaches work the best, what's most effective, what's effective in a long haul. So the long answer short is that not quite yet. As with dementia, there's not exactly a perfect treatment yet. What it comes down to is being able to take the preventative measures, which is that of taking care of your brain, taking care of your body, which really goes so far. And then there's also another great question. Is it a straight progressive slope into dementia? My mom can be fine at times, but then gets upset about something or doesn't sleep well and has an out of it sleeping a lot day, which she later does not remember, but then goes back to more normal. And this is very upsetting. Of course it's upsetting, absolutely. And her doctors say that she's just old. Well, I'm so sorry, first of all, that you are going through this, because of course that's upsetting. Of course it would be very worrisome. Because of course I am not somebody who is able to provide this sort of professional guidance, since I am not a neurological specialist. The one thing I would recommend is this is something that I think is worth speaking to a specialist about, because those are the sorts of behavior changes that are worth taking a closer look at.
Yes, absolutely. Great questions coming in. And Sophie, again, thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. I think that there is so many resources out there. And again, I'm a big advocate for going to these websites, calling these phone numbers just to get the information and to get it before you actually need it. Often, I say that, sometimes when you need it, there's so many other things going on. Maybe it's an urgent sense of getting information. Maybe you may start to get anxious and not know who to turn to or where to call. So I think the very act of just practicing going to these websites, finding out can be very helpful, because again, you never know when you might be able to just even casually pass on some information to a friend or family member. And this is all about trying to figure out what we can do to prevent it, and also to just keep ourselves as healthy as possible, regardless of someone being diagnosed with Alzheimer's or dementia, just to, promote as much as possible a healthy aging process to the degree that that's under our control. And so that's just very helpful, I think, to keep in mind in terms of the other things, as Sophie and my colleagues are mentioning, that can be done. So thank you for that question. I'm wondering if we have other questions out there, anything from our panelists that you're sort of curious about in terms of pursuing in the future.
I will share, and I was thinking quite a bit actually about what our colleague Ashley shared a couple of minutes ago, which thank you so much again for sharing that. But it reminded me of something that I want to really emphasize to everybody here. I know that this is such a difficult topic to talk about, and it's such a difficult topic to bring up and address with your families and friends as well, who are outside of your home, who may not see certain behaviors, or see certain worrisome potential signs. And I think this is really where those caregiver support groups, or even just general support groups, because there's so many different types of them, those are even more beneficial. And I really do encourage those of you in the audience to refer back to the resources we provided, the group that I mentioned called the Dementia Friends Initiative. Even that alone can provide so much guidance and comfort and support at times, because as I said, this is something that I don't think there's no guidebook for this, so to speak. And even for those of us who are incredibly experienced or knowledgeable about this field, this can be overwhelming. And for someone like myself, I have been a dementia caregiver for years before my grandfather's Alzheimer's diagnosis. And even then, when family members were turning to me asking for advice, which, as I said, I'm not a neurological specialist, so it wasn't up to me. But even then, it was very overwhelming. And those support groups I mentioned can be extremely helpful. So, and thank you again to Carolyn. It was for sharing your side of the story. As you mentioned, this was definitely not a TMI question. This is exactly what we are here for. Not just to share knowledge, but just to be able to provide this sort of space for people to be able to connect and share their experiences.
Yeah, Sophie, really a great points that you're emphasizing about the caregiving aspect to it. I do want to let you know that this is on our mind so much so that this is, when we give this presentation, we specifically make, do it in this way so that there is a separate presentation, or that we either give at the same time, or part 2 that is just focused on caregivers. And we will be coming up on to talk to this group again, to you all again. So do stay tuned for that part 2. We haven't scheduled that as of yet, but it's just focused on caregivers because, again, as Sophie mentioned, it is important to learn as much as power in this case, as much as possible. In this case, knowledge is definitely, power. And so again, you have the educational information, but also the knowledge of learning from other people that have gone through this and have learned from it and can really support each other is critically important. So, I do hope you'll take advantage of some of the resources out there and, just try to enjoy people as much as possible and know that you are definitely not alone in all of this.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much, Dr. Sanchez Johnson. Beautifully said. And does anybody have any
Absolutely.
other questions or that you might like to?
Yes, I have a question. I joined late. I wasn't able to sign on earlier, but I see that the session was recorded. Is there any way to go back and get a link to see that? I would like to see the information that was presented, if that's possible. Is there like a link to the recording?
Yes, absolutely. I'm Rose from the library. What I'm going to do is send this recording to our communications team, who will put it onto our YouTube channel. And I have your email now that you've logged in, and I will send it to you once we get it posted.
Good, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so. Yeah, thank you for being just interested in that. Seeing if we don't have any final questions. Some people are saying thank you. Yeah, thank you for joining us. It's always more fun to talk to other people and join this. And again, please take a look at what will be posted on the YouTube channel. Again, want to thank you, the audience, anyone else that is listening in the future. My colleagues Sophie Sepura, Ashley Rose, and Ross, pardon me, and Rose from Oak Park Public Library. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you everyone for attending. Like I said, I will post this to the library's YouTube channel. And just so everyone knows that this presentation in kind of a different format will happen on July 14th in Spanish. So I'm posting that to the chat right now. So if you have anybody in your life that is a predominantly Spanish speaker, this will happen again on July 14th. And then there will be a follow-up caregiver session in Spanish the week after, which is also linked into that link that I sent there. But again, thank you so much, Ashley, Sophie, Dr. Sanchez-Johnson. Really appreciate your time and everyone that attended today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much again.
Thank you so much.